In the beginning, there was paradise, a garden of life, beauty, and peace, a place where man and woman walked hand in hand with God. But that paradise, it was lost. Driven out from Eden, Adam and Eve now lived in a world far harsher than the one they had known, a world where pain, toil, and hardship had become their daily reality. With the weight of their choices heavy upon them, Adam and Eve clung to each other, yet even amidst the loss, hope remained. For despite the harshness of this new world, they had been given a gift, the gift of life. Their firstborn, Cain. Adam and Eve looked upon him as a promise, a chance at redemption. In him they saw a new beginning, a reason to hope. This child would be their strength, their joy, their pride. Time passed, and another son was born to them. They named him Abel. While Cain was their first spark of hope, Abel's birth brought peace, a calm presence that filled the house with quiet joy. He was gentle, thoughtful, a boy whose eyes seemed to hold the wonder of the world. The two brothers grew, yet their paths were destined to diverge. Even in childhood, it was clear that they were different. Two sides of the same coin, each with unique strengths and weaknesses. Cain grew up under his father's watchful eye, a farmer in training. To Cain, the land was a challenge, a force to be conquered. He took pride in his work, his muscles growing strong as he toiled from dawn until dusk. In his heart, he carried ambition, a desire to prove himself. For Cain, the earth was his to shape, to mold, to command. Abel saw the world differently. Where Cain found strength, Abel found beauty. He was drawn to the creatures of the earth, especially the gentle lambs that looked up at him with trusting eyes. Abel's life was quieter, filled with contemplation and tenderness. His heart was attuned to nature, to the simple rhythms of life. He sought not to conquer, but to care. As they grew into young men, their different paths became even clearer. They were brothers, yet each walked his own road. To their parents, Cain and Abel were two blessings, a testament to life's endurance. But these blessings were fragile, resting in the balance of choices yet to be made. Little did they know that beneath the surface of this quiet family life, a storm was brewing. A storm that would tear their world apart. For in the heart of one brother, a seed had been planted, a seed of jealousy, envy, and pride. And that seed was about to take root. Oh, two brothers, born of the same parents, raised in the same land, yet destined for paths as different as the sun from the moon. Cain, the firstborn, embraced the earth. For him, the land was a living, breathing challenge, something he could tame, control, and shape with his own hands. To Cain, every plant that sprouted from the soil was proof of his strength, his skill, his worth. As a farmer, Cain poured his heart into the earth. Day after day, he fought against thorns, rocks, and the dry ground. It was a constant battle, a test of will, a struggle that required grit, focus, and unwavering dedication. And Cain was proud of every seed he planted, every harvest he gathered. He believed his work, his offering, would bring him closer to God, make him worthy in the eyes of his Creator. And then there was Abel. If Cain was the force that shaped the earth, Abel was the heart that nurtured life. From a young age, Abel was drawn to the animals, to the quiet grace of the flock. To him, tending sheep wasn't just work, it was a calling. He saw the life in their eyes, felt the softness of their wool, and in their presence, he found peace. Abel's life was one of harmony, of quiet reflection. While Cain fought against the earth, Abel listened to it. He embraced the gentle cyclical rhythm of life, finding meaning in every sunrise, every grazing lamb, every breath of wind. His heart was pure, open, a heart that looked to God with trust, with reverence, with love. Though they shared the same blood, Cain and Abel saw the world through different eyes. To Cain, life was a struggle for survival, a battle to prove his strength. To Abel, life was a gift to be cherished, a chance to honor God through care and devotion. To their parents, these differences were both a blessing and a burden. Adam saw in Cain the strength of his own hands, the tenacity that had helped them survive outside Eden, and in Abel, Eve saw a gentleness that reminded her of Eden itself, the peace, the beauty they had left behind. But even then they sensed a tension, a divide, as if a dark shadow was beginning to form between their sons. For Cain, the labor was grueling, relentless. The earth, once blessed by God, was now cursed, and every day he felt the weight of it, an invisible burden pressing down on him, a reminder of the price of sin. Each harvest came with blood, sweat, and sacrifice, and with each crop he pulled from the ground, a thought lingered in his mind. A question, a nagging feeling that grew stronger with time. Was it enough? Would God see his work, his strength, his sacrifice? Abel, too, wondered if his work was pleasing to God. But in his heart, there was no doubt, no fear. Abel's trust was simple, complete, a faith that asked for nothing in return. He believed that God's love was boundless, that each act of kindness, each moment of care was seen and cherished by the Creator. For Abel, to love God was to love all creation, to live in harmony with the life around him. Two brothers, two paths, both driven by a desire to please God, yet divided by their view of the world, their understanding of faith, their very hearts. Cain's world was one of strength, labor, and sacrifice. Abel's world was one of peace, trust, and devotion. They were bound together by blood, yet separated by spirit, and as they walked their separate paths, the seeds of destiny were quietly taking root. As the years passed, both brothers knew there would come a day when they must make an offering to God, a sacrifice to honor the Creator who had given them life. For Cain and Abel, this was not just a ritual. It was a moment to show their gratitude, their devotion, and their worthiness in the eyes of the Almighty. Each prepared his offering in his own way, a reflection of his life's work, his heart, his intentions. Cain, who had toiled under the hot sun, who had bled and sweat for every harvest, decided to bring forth the fruits of his labor. He gathered from his fields what he believed was the best, the grains he had painstakingly planted, the vegetables he had worked so hard to cultivate. This offering represented his strength, his pride, and his tireless dedication. To Cain, it was proof of his resilience, of the battles he had fought to tame the earth. He believed that his effort, his sacrifices would be seen, acknowledged, rewarded. But Abel's heart led him down a different path. To him, the best he could offer was not found in the field, but in the flock he had raised with care, in the animals that depended on him for protection. Abel chose the firstborn lamb, the finest of his flock, an unblemished offering of pure innocence. For Abel, this sacrifice was a symbol of trust, a gift not of his own strength, but of his surrender, his recognition of God's greater power and mercy. Abel's offering was an expression of faith, a willingness to give back what had been given to him without hesitation, without pride. And so, the two brothers brought their offerings to the altar, each heart, each life, laid bare before their Creator. And in that sacred moment, they waited for a sign, for a word, for a blessing. They waited to know if their lives, their sacrifices, were enough. God looked down upon the offerings of Cain and Abel, and to Abel's sacrifice, he showed favor. It was not simply the lamb that pleased him, but the heart behind it, the spirit of humility, of reverence, the unspoken understanding that all life, all goodness flowed from the Creator himself. Abel's sacrifice was accepted, his devotion seen and cherished. But Cain's offering did not receive the same favor. It was not the fruits of the earth that God rejected, but the pride, the resentment, the hidden shadows within Cain's heart. His offering lacked the humility, the surrender, the simple trust that God desired. And as Cain looked upon his rejected sacrifice, something began to change within him. A seed of bitterness, of anger, took root in his heart. Cain's mind raced with questions, with doubts. Why, he wondered, was his hard work overlooked? Why was his brother's offering seen and his own ignored? Was Abel more righteous, more beloved? Had all his labor, all his sweat been in vain? A fire of jealousy began to burn within him, a darkness that clouded his vision, twisted his thoughts, and in that moment, Cain's heart hardened. The rejection of his offering was more than he could bear. It was a wound to his pride, a scar on his spirit, a reminder of his own insecurities, his own doubts. And as that bitterness grew, it consumed him, overshadowing the love he had once felt for his brother. Cain's thoughts turned from anger to envy, from envy to hatred, and in his heart a dangerous resolve began to take shape. Abel, unaware of the darkness stirring within his brother, continued his life with quiet faith, his heart still humble, still devoted. He did not understand Cain's struggle, nor did he see the storm building just beyond his sight. But Cain, consumed by rage and jealousy, could see nothing else. From that day forward, the bond between the brothers began to unravel. Their shared laughter, their brotherly love faded, replaced by silence, suspicion, resentment. The shadow of hatred had taken root, and it was a shadow that would soon lead them both down a path of no return. The rejection of Cain's offering had left a wound that festered, deepened, and refused to heal. He could still see the moment as if it had just happened. God's favor resting upon Abel's humble sacrifice, while his own, born of toil and sweat, was overlooked. For Cain, it was more than rejection. It was an affront, a humiliation that he could neither understand nor accept. In the days that followed, Cain's heart grew heavy with bitterness. Every glance at Abel, every thought of his brother's innocent faith, stirred a restless anger within him. To Cain, Abel's quiet acceptance, his unwavering devotion, only served as a reminder of his own shortcomings, his own doubts. He began to see his brother as more than just a sibling. Abel had become a rival, an obstacle standing between him and God's favor. Day by day, the jealousy took root, spreading through Cain's mind like a poison. His thoughts, once centered on his work, his offerings, began to circle around Abel. Abel, who had done nothing to him, yet who seemed to receive everything that Cain longed for. The bond of brotherhood began to fracture, as jealousy transformed Cain's affection into resentment, his love into bitterness. Cain tried to silence these thoughts, to push them down, to ignore the burning rage that simmered beneath the surface. But jealousy has a way of consuming the heart, clouding the mind, and twisting every feeling, every memory, every glance into a source of pain. Cain's world began to narrow, his focus shrinking until there was only one thing that mattered: Abel and the favor he had won. Why, Cain wondered, had God favored his brother? Was Abel more worthy? Had he done something that Cain could not see? Or was it some fault of Cain's own, some hidden flaw that marked him as less in the eyes of God? These questions tormented him, gnawing at his spirit, stealing his peace, and driving him deeper into the shadows of his own heart. And in his heart, a voice began to whisper, soft at first, a murmur just beyond his thoughts, but growing louder with each passing day. It spoke of Abel's offering, of God's favor, of Cain's own perceived failure. The voice fed his insecurities, fueled his anger, convincing him that he had been wronged, that the world had turned against him, As Cain's jealousy grew, he began to distance himself from his family, from the familiar fields and work that once gave him purpose. His days became filled with resentment, his nights with restless thoughts that denied him sleep. The bitterness took hold of his heart, making him a stranger to himself, changing him in ways he could neither recognize nor control. His parents noticed the change, the darkness in his gaze, the heaviness in his step. But Cain brushed them aside, dismissing their concern, unwilling to share the burden he carried. He withdrew further, retreating into the isolation of his own anger, allowing it to harden his heart, to twist his soul. And all the while, Abel remained unaware of the storm brewing within his brother. He continued his life of quiet devotion, his trust in God unshaken, his heart untroubled. To Abel, the world was still filled with beauty, with peace, with a love for the Creator that filled every corner of his being. But to Cain, each moment Abel spent in worship, each word of faith that fell from his lips was a thorn, a reminder of everything he felt he lacked. The sight of Abel's peace, his unwavering faith, was a painful contrast to Cain's own turmoil, fueling the fire that had begun to consume him from within. As the jealousy grew, it began to distort Cain's view of reality. No longer did he see Abel as his brother, his companion, his friend. He saw only a rival, a favored son, a reminder of his own rejection. The love that had once bound them together faded, replaced by an anger that grew darker, more dangerous with every passing day. And in his heart, the whispers continued, urging him forward, filling him with thoughts he would have once dismissed, actions he would have once found unthinkable. Jealousy, envy, bitterness. Each emotion added weight to the growing burden within him, leading him toward a decision that would change everything. Cain's path was set, his heart hardened, his soul consumed by the fire of jealousy, and in the depths of his spirit, a terrible resolve began to take shape, a resolve that would not be silenced, that would demand an answer, an outlet, a release. The darkness within Cain had grown unbearable, festering into a bitterness so deep, so consuming that it left no room for light, no place for reason. The whispers in his heart had grown louder, no longer content to remain hidden. The jealousy, the anger, the feelings of rejection, they pressed upon him, urging him to act, to find a release from the torment that had stolen his peace, his joy, his very sense of self. And so one day, Cain called out to Abel, his voice hollow, his tone strange, carrying an edge that Abel did not recognize. He invited his brother to join him in the fields, away from the eyes of their parents, away from the familiar comfort of the home they had shared. Abel, unaware of the danger that lurked within his brother's heart, followed without question. His trust was pure, untainted by suspicion or fear. Abel looked upon Cain and saw only his brother, the one he had grown up beside, the one he had laughed with, worked with, prayed with. But as they walked together into the quiet, empty field, Abel could not see the darkness in Cain's eyes, the shadows that had turned love into hate, brotherhood into rivalry. They came to a stop, surrounded only by silence, the stillness broken by the faint rustling of the wind in the crops. And there, in that field, the tension that had been building within Cain reached its breaking point. The whispers in his mind became a roar, drowning out all else, filling him with a need, a compulsion that could not be denied. Cain's hand tightened, his gaze fixed on Abel, who still looked upon him with innocent eyes, eyes filled with trust, with love. And in that moment, Cain could feel nothing but anger. Anger at his brother's peace, at his own torment, at the seeming injustice that had left him empty and alone. Then, with a suddenness that shattered the quiet of the field, Cain struck. The act was swift, brutal, driven by a rage he could no longer contain. Abel's eyes widened in shock, a flicker of pain, of confusion, flashing across his face as he looked upon his brother, not understanding, not comprehending the betrayal that had come so swiftly, so mercilessly. And as Abel fell, the light in his eyes fading, Cain's anger, his jealousy, his hatred, all of it seemed to drain away, leaving him standing there alone in silence. The whispers had quieted, the fire in his heart had burned out, and in its place there was only emptiness, a hollow silence that echoed within him, chilling him to the core. Cain looked down at his hands, now stained with the blood of his brother, blood that cried out from the earth, blood that bore witness to the first murder. For the first time, the reality of his actions settled upon him, heavy and unrelenting. He had taken the life of his own brother, the one who had trusted him, the one who had loved him without question. A wave of horror washed over him as he realized the finality of what he had done. Abel was gone, forever lost, his gentle voice silenced, his warm presence erased. The bond they had once shared, the memories of childhood, the dreams of family, all of it had been destroyed in a single tragic instant. Cain looked around, the silence of the field pressing in on him, filling him with a dread he could not escape. The land, once a place of labor, of pride, now felt cold, lifeless, bearing witness to his guilt, his crime, his irreversible choice. And in the stillness, Cain's heart was seized by fear, by regret, by a sorrow that he could not name. The rage that had driven him was gone, replaced by a void that would never be filled. He had given in to the darkness, allowed jealousy to turn him against his own flesh and blood. And now he was alone, truly, irrevocably alone. The first murder had been committed, the first act of brother turning against brother, and with Abel's death, the world would never be the same. Cain was alone in the silent field, his hands still stained with his brother's blood. The weight of his actions pressed upon him, a crushing guilt that filled the empty silence around him. He wanted to run, to flee from the sight of what he had done, to hide from the reality of his crime. But there was no escaping it, no hiding from the darkness he had unleashed. And in that stillness, a voice broke the silence, a voice that held the weight of eternity, a voice that spoke with both power and sorrow. It was the voice of God calling out to Cain, asking him the question that pierced his very soul. "Where is your brother Abel?" The question echoed through the empty field, reverberating in Cain's mind. He felt a shiver of fear run through him, a fear that gnawed at his heart, stripping away the last remnants of his defiance. Cain knew that God already knew the truth. This question was not for God's knowledge, but for Cain's own reckoning, a chance to face the consequences of his actions, to confront the darkness within him. But Cain's heart, hardened by pride and guilt, clung to its defenses. He tried to bury his fear, to hide behind a mask of indifference, to evade the judgment he knew was coming. And with a voice that trembled with both defiance and shame, he replied, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Cain's words, spoken in desperation, held a bitter irony, a reminder of the bond he had shattered. He had once been his brother's keeper, a role given to him by birth, by blood, by love. Yet now he stood as his brother's betrayer, his slayer, a man who had turned his back on the very duty that once defined him. But God's gaze pierced through the mask, cutting to the very heart of Cain's soul. The truth lay bare before the Creator, and there was no hiding from the reality of what he had done. In a voice filled with sorrow and righteous anger, God spoke again, saying, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain felt the full weight of those words, felt the ground beneath him tremble as if bearing witness to the crime he had committed. The blood of Abel, the innocent, the faithful, cried out for justice, for retribution. a silent scream that reverberated through the earth, through the heaven, reaching the ears of God Himself. And then came the sentence, a judgment that would forever mark Cain's life. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. The word struck Cain with a force he had never felt before. The very ground he had worked, the earth he had tried to tame, had turned against him, rejecting him as he had rejected his brother. The curse would follow him, binding him to a life of wandering, of rootlessness, a life without home, without peace. In that moment, the weight of his actions pressed upon Cain in full, and he was filled with a fear, a terror that gripped him completely. He cried out, his voice trembling with desperation, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Cain feared the isolation, the loneliness, the separation from God's presence more than anything else. He knew that the burden of his guilt, the emptiness left by Abel's absence, would haunt him for the rest of his days. And now, even his life was in danger, as he became a marked man, cast out and vulnerable. But even in judgment, there was mercy. God, in His boundless compassion, placed a mark upon Cain, a mark not of shame, but of protection. Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. With this mark, God ensured that no one would harm Cain, that he would live bearing his punishment, but spared from further violence. Cain was left to bear his guilt, his loneliness, his curse, but with a promise that he would not be forgotten, that he would not be entirely cast away. And so, with a heavy heart and a burden that would follow him forever, Cain left the presence of God, a wanderer, carrying the weight of his choice, his crime, and the life he had taken. Thus, the earth bore the first blood, and humanity learned the cost of jealousy, of unchecked anger, of turning against one's own. And Cain, marked yet protected, became a symbol, a reminder of both justice and mercy, of the consequences of sin and the unending reach of divine compassion. Yet even in exile, life continued. Cain found a place to settle, a place where he sought to build something new. He married, had children, and from him grew a lineage, a family that carried with it both his strength and his scar. Cain built a city, naming it after his son Enoch, as if trying to create a legacy beyond his past, to carve out a place for himself and his descendants in a world that had cast him out. His children, his descendants, spread across the earth, each generation carrying with it the stories, the memories, the lessons of their forefather. They were shaped by Cain's story, marked by the knowledge of the first murder, of the first broken bond, of the weight of unchecked jealousy and anger. And through the generations, Cain's legacy became a symbol, a reminder of the destructive power of envy, of the darkness that could take root within the human heart. The blood of Abel spilled upon the earth became a haunting echo, a warning to all who would follow. Humanity would remember the story of Cain and Abel, passing it down through the ages, recounting it as a tale of caution, of the consequences of letting anger and pride overshadow love and loyalty. But Cain's legacy was not only a story of punishment and sorrow. His mark of protection was also a reminder of God's mercy, of the compassion that even a grave sin could not erase. Though he was condemned to wander, to bear the guilt of his actions, he was not entirely cast out. God's mark upon Cain was a promise that even in the depths of guilt, in the midst of punishment, there was still a place for mercy, a reminder of the Creator's unending grace. Through Cain's story, humanity learned that choices carry consequences, that every action, every word, every thought sown in anger has the power to shape lives, to wound, to destroy. His life became a testament to the cost of turning against one's own, of betraying the trust of family, of allowing jealousy to consume the heart. Cain's descendants spread, mingling with others, building lives, telling stories, passing down the lessons they had learned. And as humanity grew, they carried with them the knowledge of the first brothers, the first division, the first tragic choice. The blood of Abel cried out from the ground, a silent witness to the need for love, for unity, for restraint in the face of anger. Yet even as the generations passed, Cain's story was not forgotten. It became woven into the fabric of human understanding, a story that spoke to the depths of human nature, the struggles of the heart, the choices that define us. Cain, the wanderer, had left behind more than a city, more than a family. He had left behind a legacy that would forever remind humanity of both the power of sin and the boundless reach of divine mercy. And so the story of Cain and Abel became more than a tale of the past. The jealousy that overtook Cain's heart is a reflection of a struggle that lies within all of us. It is the temptation to compare ourselves to others, to see life as a competition rather than a shared journey. Cain's envy, his resentment, grew out of his sense of inadequacy, of unworthiness, fueled by the belief that he deserved something more. In his jealousy, he could no longer see his brother as a loved one, only as a rival. And in that darkness, he allowed jealousy to turn to hatred that led to a terrible choice. And so Cain's story becomes a warning, a reminder of the destructive power of unchecked anger, of pride, of envy. It shows us how a single seed of jealousy, left to grow, can lead to actions that cannot be undone. Actions that tear apart the very fabric of our relationships, our families, our communities. But this story does not stop at warning. It also calls us to reflection, to accountability. When God asked Cain, "Where is your brother?" He was not asking for information. He was calling Cain to face the truth, to take responsibility for his actions, to acknowledge the bond he had broken. Cain's defiant answer, "Am I my brother's keeper?" reveals a denial of that responsibility, a refusal to accept the role he was meant to play in Abel's life. This question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" echoes throughout history, challenging us to consider our responsibility toward others, toward our families, our communities, even our world. Are we not all, in some way, our brother's keeper? Are we not called to care, to protect, to love, to be accountable for one another? Yet even in the midst of Cain's sin, we see God's mercy, a mercy that speaks to the boundless grace of the Creator. Though Cain was punished, condemned to a life of wandering, he was not abandoned. God marked him with protection, sparing him from further violence, showing a compassion that goes beyond justice, a love that persists even in the face of betrayal. This mark of protection reminds us that God's love is not a love of mere justice, but of forgiveness, of patience, of grace. In this mark, we find a powerful message that even when we fail, even when we fall short, we are not entirely cast away. There is still room for mercy, still a place for redemption, a path toward healing. The story of Cain and Abel calls us to look within, to examine our own hearts, our own lives. It invites us to ask difficult questions. Where do we allow jealousy to creep in, allowing it to poison our view of others? How do we approach our relationship with God? Do we offer our hearts with humility, or do we give with expectations, with pride? And perhaps most importantly, how do we see those around us? Do we view them as rivals, as competition, or do we see them as brothers, as sisters, as part of the same family? In the end, Cain's story is not just about the consequences of sin. It is about the choices we make, the paths we take, the responsibility we bear for one another. It reminds us that faith is not about proving ourselves worthy, but about living in harmony with others, with God, and with ourselves. And so the story of Cain and Abel lives on, a timeless reminder of both the frailty and the strength of the human heart. It speaks of our potential to harm, but also our capacity to heal, to forgive, to rise above jealousy and pride. It reminds us that while the ground may bear the weight of our choices, there is always room for mercy, always a chance for redemption, always a path back to the love that created us. Later in Genesis, we meet two more brothers whose lives mirror the story of Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau. Like Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau are born into the same family, yet their lives take very different paths. Esau, the firstborn, is a hunter, strong and independent, while Jacob, quieter and more reflective, finds favor in his mother's eyes. Their differences lead to rivalry and jealousy, culminating in Jacob's deceitful act of taking his brother's birthright and blessing, a betrayal that drives them apart, much as Cain's jealousy led him to turn against Abel. But there is a crucial difference in the story of Jacob and Esau. While Cain's jealousy led to violence and separation, Jacob and Esau's story ends in reconciliation. Years later, the two brothers meet again, not as enemies, but as family. Esau, the wronged brother, offers forgiveness, and the two are able to embrace, to rebuild what was once broken. This reconciliation stands in contrast to the tragedy of Cain and Abel, showing us that while jealousy can divide, forgiveness can heal. Further on, we encounter the story of Joseph and his brothers, a story steeped in jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately, redemption. Joseph, favored by their father Jacob, is envied by his older brothers who resent his dreams, his special status, his visions of leadership. Driven by jealousy, they plot against him, selling him into slavery and faking his death. Once again, brother turns against brother, echoing the age-old theme of Cain and Abel. Yet Joseph's story, too, ends differently. Through years of hardship and suffering, Joseph rises to a position of power in Egypt, and when his brothers come to him in need, he does not respond with vengeance, but with compassion. Joseph chooses to forgive, to reconcile, to mend the broken family bond, echoing the mercy that God extended to Cain. In Joseph's story, we see that even the deepest wounds of betrayal can be healed through love and forgiveness. Cain and Abel's story, in many ways, foreshadows these later accounts of sibling rivalry, showing us the potential for both harm and healing within family bonds. But it also sets the stage for another contrast, the tale of two kings, Saul and David. Like Cain, Saul struggles with jealousy, fearing that David, his young and faithful servant, might usurp his place, steal his favor. Saul's jealousy consumes him, driving him to act out in anger, to plot against David, to turn against a man who once served him with loyalty and love. Yet David, unlike Abel, is spared from the violence driven by Saul's jealousy. Instead, he shows patience, refusing to retaliate, even when given the opportunity. David's restraint serves as a reminder that one can rise above jealousy, that we have a choice in how we respond to rivalry, to envy, to the challenges that test our character. In each of these stories, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers Saul and David, the legacy of Cain and Abel lives on. Each narrative adds a new layer, a new perspective, deepening our understanding of the challenges and complexities of human relationships. We see jealousy and resentment, but we also see forgiveness, healing, and the chance to choose a different path. Ultimately, the story of Cain and Abel is more than a tragedy. It is a warning and a guide. It tells us of the dangers of letting jealousy rule our hearts, but it also hints at the possibility of reconciliation, of redemption, Each parallel, each echo in the Bible serves as a reminder that we are not defined by our initial choices. Though Cain chose violence, others, like Joseph and David, chose forgiveness, chose peace. Through them we see the path not taken, the chance to break the cycle of jealousy and betrayal, to choose a legacy of love.